A Sacramento jury awarded a verdict of $27 million, including $23 million in punitive damages against Seattle-based Emeritus in the death of 81-year-old Joan Boyce, finding management at the nation's then largest operator of assisted living residences responsible for elder abuse and neglect. The lawsuit by the family of Joan Boyce, who had advanced dementia, claimed that Emeritus accepted her although she was physically too debilitated for the care that the facility provides. Then she was left at the mercy of a few unqualified, untrained, and overburdened caregivers with predictable and tragic results. The verdict was one of the largest punitive damages award in California, $22,963,943.81. Jurors tacked on Boyce's age in pennies because they didn't want Emeritus to forget her. During 3 months in the memory care unit of Emeritus at Emerald Hills in Auburn, California, Boyce developed several deep necrotic pressure wounds. She died in February 2009, 10 weeks after being moved to a skilled nursing facility for hospice care. Emeritus, acquired by Brookdale Senior Living, was the biggest provider of a type of senior housing that promised its elderly clientele some assistance in daily life without the intensive personal care of a nursing home. The average age of Emeritus residents was 84. They paid an average of $4,127 a month, producing company revenues of nearly $1.6 billion from more than 50,000 units, mostly devoted to assisted living. As a result of Emeritus' merger with Brookdale, Brookdale now operates over 1,100 facilities serving about 100,000 patients in 47 states. An episode of Frontline, which aired on July 30th, 2013, documented the alleged neglect and physical abuses perpetrated on patients by employees of Emeritus. Here today are Joan's son and daughter to personally tell the horrors their mother experienced at Emeritus before she died.
So my mom meant really everything to me. Growing up, she was the one that was home with me and my brother and my sister. Many of my life lessons came from her or through her. Many of my parenting skills that I've imparted on my own children.
Mom meant a great deal to me because she was a very atypical mother-in-law in that I loved her and she was great to me. She was like my own mom. She taught me how to cook. She taught me how to make family a priority in addition to my own mom, but it was like having two wonderful moms all at the same time.
We knew that the disease was progressing and we knew that there was an end time coming, but I just wanted it to be as dignified as possible. And my mom was a well-educated woman, would have wanted the exact same thing, and that was taken from her.
I hold responsible the people at the top of the corporation that put in the policies that you were to disregard the benefit of the resident for the money that would come in from that resident.
So I hold responsible the corporation, Emeritus at that time, because what we uncovered was that this was not a random act. It was a systematic disease, so to speak, that ran all the way to the top.
I hold responsible the people who were the medical people, the wellness nurse, that saw there were things happening to Mom that were inexcusable, pressure sores. She was telling her staff to just not tell the family what was happening. I hold her incredibly responsible. She was a nurse. She had a duty to my mother-in-law, and she chose to ignore it.
Most of these corporate slogans were coming down from the top, the heads in beds to shut the back door. Those were not being developed at our one facility. That was a corporate-wide policy.
I want to see those people trained appropriately, and I want to see teeth put behind the regulations so that the corporate execs, the wellness nurses, the people who choose to bend those rules will be held responsible and made to change before more people get hurt.
There's a huge need for this industry, so I don't diminish that at all, but I would like to see more corporate responsibility.
Joan's case was not an isolated incident, and this Sacramento verdict was not the first time that Emeritus had been sanctioned by courts or regulators over issues of understaffing or inadequate care. Among others, in 2015, Emeritus Corporation agreed to pay $13 million to settle a class action lawsuit filed on behalf of residents of assisted living communities alleging the company made misleading statements about its services and defrauding them to pay for additional services they never actually received. And in Texas, Emeritus was hit with punitive damages almost as large in 2005 when a jury awarded $18 million for the wrongful death of another resident. Mary Kasuba, the Emeritus Emerald Hills former resident care director, in 2007 wrote a 5-page letter to 10 top Emeritus executives and board members to say she faced a huge shortage of staff. She never heard back from any of them and later resigned. In this new Insider exclusive Justice in America Network TV special, Joan Boyce's tragic story clearly demonstrates that reports of serious physical, sexual, and verbal abuse are too numerous among the nation's nursing homes, which is why our news staff is visiting with Eric and Kathleen Boyce, Joan's children, and their lawyer, Leslie Clement, at the Clement Law Group, on location in Sacramento, California, to go behind the headlines and see how Emeritus corporate management, led by co-founder and former chairman Dan Beatty, put profits before people, intentionally ignoring his staff on the lack of quality care and adequate staffing, which resulted in one of America's greatest scandals and frauds in the nursing home assisted living industry. Emeritus carried out its fraudulent scheme to deceive families and their residents in multiple ways. Their former CEO, Dan Beatty, even called this facility a shithole and repeatedly informed his management and staff that Emeritus had no barriers to sales and that all that mattered was not quality of care, but quantity of heads in the beds. And once they were in the facility, then closed the back door because they would not be leaving. Leslie has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike. As one of the best trial lawyers in California to protect our elders, she makes it her dedicated mission to get legitimate and truthful answers to what really happened to her clients in each case. She believes that elders within our community deserve the utmost respect and that any individual who brings harm to an elderly person should be held accountable. She uses the civil court system to ensure the rights of the elderly are protected and that their abusers are held accountable for their wrongdoing. She sees it in her mission to fight for people who have been harmed by the willful or negligent actions of others. Leslie has built a substantial reputation by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down, and her amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide her clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Sacramento, California. It is my great pleasure to introduce Leslie Clement and Monica Padrazini to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Today we're going to be talking about many of the cases that you do, like nursing home deaths and all this other sort of thing. But let's talk a little bit about both of you and how you got in this business of the area of law protecting elders.
1994, I got a phone call from my Aunt Pam, and she left me a voicemail message. And I'll never forget her voice. She was trembling, she was crying, and she told me her mother, my Aunt Dorothy, was in the emergency room. And she'd been beaten up. And the doctor said it was elder abuse. And she didn't know what to do. I'm the only one foolish enough in my family to be a lawyer. So I went down and I saw Dorothy and I couldn't believe it.
And she had been abused in the facility.
She had been beaten up by the only caregiver in a 46-bed Alzheimer's specialty facility in Marin. Very expensive facility. and she was put outside to make it appear as though she had been mugged. In the course of our investigation, my investigator found in about 2 hours 2 other former employees who worked with the assailant in 2 different care facilities who had reported her, the assailant, for beating up, physically abusing other residents. And nobody did any background. Nobody reported them. They don't want anybody coming in from the state to see what they're doing. So I was a business lawyer. I'd never done anything. I'd never read a medical record before. I had no idea what I was doing, but I dug in, I learned, I talked to advocates all over the country, and I learned that nobody will take these cases at that time. And they would say to me, well, you'll take an elder abuse case? Will you help us? And that was my first case, and we tried it, and we got a great result, but it changed my life. So I left the firm I was in, left the partnership I was in, and started my own firm. It was me and a paralegal to start, and then my cousin Monica joined the firm, and she's been an invaluable part of our team for 25 years.
And I understand, Monica, that not only are you a paralegal, but you do a lot of the groundwork investigation, the gumshoe work, right?
Yes, that is part of my job, doing the investigation into complaints issued by the public, specifically when we take a case, our client, to the Department of Social Services, if it's assisted living, to the Department of Health, if it's a nursing home. I retrieve the files that are available to the public and do a thorough review of the documentation. I've found over the 25 years, we have had a lot more pushback from these agencies on providing us with the documentation that supports their investigations. In the beginning, it was forthcoming in the public file, and now we're told they don't maintain it. We have to do a FOIA request or a PRA, Public Records Act request, and usually that turns into years before, if we ever see the investigative.
Yeah, so let's look at what's going behind the scenes. If they make it difficult, the state agencies make it difficult to get information, who's behind that? Because the state agency is not being sued, right?
No, they're not.
They are instructing their investigators not to substantiate complaints, egregious complaints that result in resident deaths, but they will substantiate a minor hot water is not the appropriate temperature, or there's, an uncleanly kitchen or some type of unsanitary situation, but, falls that result in fractures, abuse, sexual, that is typically unsubstantiated.
When, since you do many of these type of cases, when they see you coming and again requesting additional information, don't they get used to you after a while?
I think they are now.
No, but don't they say, okay, we'll give it to you, no hassle?
No. Now it's getting more difficult. We, have to go up the chain, starting with the officer of the day who is by law supposed to provide you on request when you come into their agency with the file. Now you go in there and, the file's not here. It's locked in the investigator's cabinet, things that are completely illegal. They need to be produced on demand. It's for the public's service to know what's in this file for a facility.
Another case which interested us quite a bit was the case where you represented the family of Joan Boyce.
Well, Joan was the wife many years to her husband Myron. She was a mother of 3 children. She was a school teacher and a grandmother. She loved to have fun and tell stories, and she loved to have her family around her.
Now, that would be a nice way to end the story of someone's life, but that's not what happened along the road, down the road, is it? And that's why the family came to you, correct? Tell our audience about this case that involved Joan.
Well, Joan and her husband Myron moved up to Sacramento area to be closer to their grandchildren, their son Eric and his wife Kathleen. And they wanted to still have their independence. They didn't want to move in with their kids. So they decided to go into an independent and assisted living facility. And Myron was on the independent side, and Joan initially was in assisted living, but then she was moved into memory care as her memory decreased. Within 10 days of her admission to Emeritus, the largest long-term care provider in the world at that time, within 10 days she had an unwitnessed fall in the memory care unit.
I want to ask you, you've used this term a number of times. Is that the way it's written in the medical charts? Unwitnessed?
Yes.
It is.
It's a term of art. You know, all these falls are unwitnessed. It's very rare that I ever see a record where someone watched or saw a resident or patient fall. So honestly, we don't know how our clients end up on the ground. But in Joan's case, she ended up being sent to the hospital alone with just the paramedics. Family wasn't notified. She's there in the emergency room. She doesn't know what's going on. I mean, how horrific. They didn't even have enough staff to send someone with Joan to the hospital to speak on her behalf. They brought her back to Emeritus, to the memory care unit, and before this fall, she was walking around. They didn't want that anymore. Emeritus put her in a wheelchair. She didn't get up anymore, and she began to get weaker. The family came every day. Her husband, Myron, would be with her every day. He was so worried about her.
Is part of the therapy that they should provide is strengthening the physical being of a resident. So, for example, you said they put her in a wheelchair. Well, you deteriorate, after that. Do they have people, physical therapists, that are supposed to come in and say, let's go for a walk today. Let's get out in the sun.
Not in assisted living. Assisted living staff, they don't even have typically certified nursing assistants. They have caregivers. They have med techs. Med techs pass out medication, but they have no training. They're not a nurse. If you're lucky in an assisted living facility, there may be one nurse. She's the wellness nurse. But she's a 9-to-5 employee, Monday through Friday. They don't have nurse in that building round the clock, and yet they're taking these people and keeping them who have high care needs.
Because they're worth $6,000 a month. Okay, so what is a wellness nurse? What does that mean? Jack of all trades?
Basically, it means an administrator, somebody who's helping fill the building, somebody who's helping keep the residents in the building, somebody who's supposed to be training the staff. But as we found out in this case, that absolutely was not happening. I mean, she didn't even have the training that she needed according to Emeritus's own policies and procedures.
I just thought about this as I'm talking with you. You've been very successful in representing clients in getting, and this case was a landmark case, in getting successful resolutions to tragic situations. Looking on the defendant side, these huge conglomerates, do a lot of these cases end up getting dismissed? Do a lot of these cases their plaintiff lawyers end up giving up because they're too expensive to prosecute? Is that what they're banking on?
Oh, I think so. Bury them. Bury the lawyers. Or, the lawyers can't afford it. They aren't going to put that money in because they have too many cases. I mean, I have a practice. I never take more than half a dozen cases. I like to have 3. But what I like to do is a deep dive into the case, but a deep dive into the defendant's conduct, because this is a cause. We're trying to change the behavior. We're trying to let the public know what's going on in these buildings, what can happen to their loved one. There's some cases, the cases that I take, the family's there all the time. These aren't cases where somebody's just dumped their mom off and doesn't come back. I take cases where the family is consistently there and trying to get the help. But so many times my clients aren't healthcare providers. They don't know what should or shouldn't be done. And what happens is when they make complaints, they're lied to. We'll do better. Oh, we'll take care of that. We're going to get that done. We're going to address your needs. But they don't. And the reason we know they don't is look at these horrific results.
I'm curious, $6,000 a month for some of these memory care units. How much does it cost the average assisted living, nursing home organization to handle whatever needs that resident has for the month?
Far, far less than $6,000. I mean, you think of these memory care units in particular where Joan was. There were some shifts, there was one caregiver for the entire unit. There was days during her short time in Emeritus, that there was, for a 100-bed, 3-story building, that there were 3 staff in the whole building.
3 for 100 people.
Correct. And there were occasions where there was no one in the memory care unit with these frail elders who could not get out of their room by themselves. It's a locked room. They can't go anywhere. They can't get help. We had a caregiver who testified that Emeritus would lock the refrigerator at night. And these residents with dementia, sometimes they sundown. So they're sleeping in the day, they're up at night, and they're upset, they're agitated. And this caregiver says, I want to give them something to eat. Maybe that's the problem. And they'd lock the refrigerator, and I couldn't get any food for them. She called her husband and asked him to bring milk and food so that she could give it to the residents and help them.
It's like being in prison, except you're paying $6,000 a month.
Absolutely. And then you look, prisoners get treated better. I'm sorry, but they do.
So tell our audience a little bit about what happened with Joan when she was in there.
Well, after she had her fall and they put her in the wheelchair, she was declining. She was left in bed or in the wheelchair 24/7. She became contracted, meaning she couldn't fully extend her arms or legs. And she developed bed sores, horrific bed sores, that they lied to the family. They never told them that this was happening. And the staff who testified, the horror stories they told us. One of the caregiver med techs told us that she was scared every day that someone would be seriously harmed, that someone would die from the care they were getting there. She told us that although she had no training, she was trying to treat on her own Joan's bed sores. And when she told the nurse, the wellness nurse, what she was doing, how she needed help, the nurse said, just don't tell anybody. I mean, the cover-up was so extensive that what we found, it went all the way up to the top of the company.
And let's talk about that top of the company. Who is that?
Well, the founder and co-CEO was Dan Beatty. The other CEO was a gentleman by the name of Granger Cobb. And they were on a buying spree. They were buying up facilities and filling the buildings. And it was in that case where I met regional sales staff who worked for Emeritus tell me the industry lingo. And heads in the beds means you fill that building and close the back door. You don't let them leave.
Probably the same mantra right now that a lot of these nursing homes and assisted living facilities follow too.
It's absolutely.
Get them in, lock them up, and forget about them.
Well, don't forget to collect the money.
Collect the money.
And if the family complains, reassure them.
It's horrible. What eventually happened to Joan?
Her family became so dissatisfied with what turned out to be lies after they had a meeting with the administration. They took Dorothy out and they took her to a higher level of care. And her daughter-in-law, well, like a daughter to her, Kathleen, was with Joan when the nurses at the new facility disrobed her and started counting the bed sores on her body. There were 8 bed sores. Kathleen couldn't even talk. She couldn't stop crying. And I mean, I can't even imagine what it would be like to see your dear mother in bed, covered with bed sores, and no one told you anything.
What happens for our audience when you have bed sores that remain untreated?
Well, bed sores can go through muscle and all the way down to the bone. You have an open wound like that, your likelihood of dying from an infection is dramatic. You end up having sepsis, a blood infection, and it's horribly painful, and you die. You get all kinds of infections, resistant bugs that the hospital can't even treat.
Right. Eventually you went to trial. What happened?
Well, at trial, we had so many regional employees come forward and testify about how they were told to overlook problems, how they were told to shred documents. We even had an administrator of a facility come forward and tell us that her first day, she went to the memory care and the residents were eating out of dog bowls. Dog bowls. And she complained about that to her supervisor, who blew her off. But during our investigation, we obtained emails. And that particular administrator who complained, her boss shot around an email to all the other regional people in which she wrote, "Whine, whine, whine." I had that regional person on the stand at trial, and she lied repeatedly about facts that I was holding in my hands with her emails. The jury was furious. We even had the vice president of operations for all of California, over 50 facilities. And she testified that when she went to Emeritus headquarters in Seattle the first time for training, they were having like a company dinner of all the top brass, and she was invited. And she met Dan Beatty for the first time. And he said, "Oh, you're taking over oh, you're the one that's taken on the shithole." That's how we referred to California. And the vice president at that time didn't know what to think. Later, when she started evaluating every single building in California, she was touring them. And she was in a building in Southern California. And as she's walking through with the administrator, she notices a really foul odor. And she says, what is going on? There's something going on in that room. And she tried to turn the handle. It was locked. And she told the administrator, "Get the key and unlock that door." And when they opened the door, here was an elderly gentleman in a room that was covered with feces. Covered.
In bed.
He's in bed. The walls are covered with feces. No one has done anything. Apparently, he had severe dementia and was painting the room with his own feces. You could smell it in the hall. The vice president reported that as elder abuse, just as everyone working in that building should have. She said, he has got to get out of here. This is not assisted living care.
Yeah, I keep coming back to this same question that I've asked you. If I was the son or daughter of that person that was locked up in the prison, painting the walls with his own feces, I'd call the police. But the police aren't doing anything about it, are they?
Somebody calls the police, takes the police a while to get there. Maybe they see the evidence, maybe they don't. Maybe it gets cleaned up. I mean, I had a rape case here several years ago where my client was found in the room and it was described as laying on a pool of blood. Someone called the sheriff. The sheriff got out there. Room was spanking clean. They said she had a fall. She was taken to the hospital and brought into the OR where the neurosurgeon had to cut through her head to remove a giant hematoma, a blood clot. While he was in that room, he told the staff, get the social worker in here for the hospital. He came in and told her, this is abuse. She had a fall, get an injury like this, she would have had fallen down 2 flights of stairs. But the sheriff did nothing. There was no criminal charges brought.
Right. Joan's case ended up being a landmark case in the state of California. Tell our audience what the jury awarded her family and why they awarded her family the verdict that she got.
Well, the jury made a verdict that was for Joan's pain and suffering, $3,875,000.
That's for her pain and suffering.
For her pain and suffering. They awarded the family $250,000 for the loss of love and comfort of a Joan. They awarded over $22 million in punitive damages against Emeritus for abusing and neglecting Joan. They found that it was at the top of the food chain, Dan Beatty and Granger Cobb. They told me this after the trial was over when they had a barbecue and invited me. And what they did was we put on evidence of what the compensation was for Dan Beatty and Granger Cobb, and it was over $22 million. And to that, they added how much money Joan Boyce had paid Emeritus to care for her. And at the very end, they added 81 cents. That was how old Joan was when she died. And the jurors told me they never wanted Emeritus to forget what they did to Joan Boyce.
Well, congratulations on that verdict. And that really sent a message. That's why we're doing this show, because it isn't the money, it's the message. You know, that's what's important here. We are very fortunate to have, Kathleen and Eric here today. So let's bring them on. It is my great pleasure to introduce Kathleen and Eric Boyce to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Sad story about your mom. Successful legal outcome, but I'm sure you'd still want to have her around today. You know, tell our audience a little bit about your opinion of the nursing home that she was in.
You know, my parents had relocated from the San Francisco Bay Area to be up closer to us and our children, their grandchildren. And the first place that they went to was a independent and assisted living facility, and it was wonderful. It was a good experience. They lived there for well over a year with no problems. And then, although it was about 40 minutes from our home, so I had heard about another facility that was only 15 minutes from our home, and I decided, you know, that was probably a good place. I basically talked my parents into moving there, as it would be easier for us to see them and see them more often, and my children would see them. My wife raised some concerns, mainly because we were going from a private facility to a publicly traded facility. You know, it was a company that was, and my opinion at that time had been, well, they've got to do a good job. They're answering to shareholders. They're So I didn't heed her warning at the time. And anyway, we moved him in there. It was just days into it that red flags started to show up. There was a fall very early on. I think the biggest catalyst for us to start questioning our decision here was, I think only several weeks into her stay there, I got a call from an emergency room. Local hospital called me and said, "Hey, your mother's here." And I said, "What?" And then, we found out that she had had another fall, and they had transported her over. And at that time, the Alzheimer's was at a significant stage where my mom didn't really talk. She couldn't communicate. She was afraid now of strangers. We found out that the ambulance crew took her. No one with her, no one from the facility assisted her. And the doctor was confused because she couldn't advocate or communicate on her behalf, and why we weren't there. He was almost angry. And I said, "You're the first person that's told us she's there." So I responded down there and took her and brought her back, and we started to question the staff. We had demanded several interviews with the director and the nursing, the RN, and they kept putting us off, and they wouldn't meet with us. And then we saw other things happening. I used to go there at lunchtime when my mom was being fed, and I noticed that all the memory care patients, which were mostly Alzheimer's, dementia patients, were eating whole chickens, bone-in chicken, and they can't use utensils. They had lost that. Most of them had lost that ability. They certainly couldn't take out small little bones, things that could be harmful. So we brought that up to them. And finally, after 3 months of it wasn't quite even 3 months, we decided we've got to get Mom out of there. And so within the next week, we had moved her to another facility. And that's where, on the intake of that, my wife had gone with them, or gone with my mother to be there. I was at work, and I just received a phone call from Kathleen, and it's the worst phone call you could get. She was just sobbing, crying. And finally, after 30 seconds or so, she said, I forget exactly, but there's sores all over your mother. And I said, "What?" And there was so much deceit and dishonesty by the staff that I think at the time there were 7 or 8, most of them unstageable pressure ulcers. They couldn't determine the extent that these pressure ulcers were, and they're extremely painful, excruciatingly painful, but my mom couldn't communicate. And so that was I remember just being so frustrated and angry, and the thought of calling in law enforcement. But again, I kind of drew back on my career in that field, and knew there's no one there that's going to know what to say, what to ask, how to investigate this. I certainly, when I was in law enforcement, couldn't have done it. Never received any training there. Never who would you go after? Whose fault is this? And so that led us to ultimately to Leslie.
When you came to Leslie, Kathleen, what were your main concerns? What did you want her to do for you and your husband?
Our biggest thing was we knew how damaging this was to us as her kids and our family, and we didn't want to see this happen to anyone else. And we wanted some responsibility put upon this corporation that had done this to Mom, that we put our trust in. And she really helped us do that.
Okay, it was a long battle, right? You've learned a little bit about how the justice system works. What's your opinion of how the justice system works?
Yeah, I think the hardest part was when we were in trial. And let me go back. When we first contacted Leslie, we just knew that a wrong had occurred. Nothing like this should have happened to my mother. Through the investigation, through Leslie and her team, their investigation just started. It was like peeling that onion. We just had some, the injuries to my mother, and that's all. That was the extent at that time. And then we just started to unpeel this onion that revealed this wasn't just an acute condition. This was a chronic condition.
System-wide.
Oh, absolutely. And not just this company.
Yeah.
And unbelievable details began to emerge that were shocking. And I think the hardest part was during court, we just presented facts. Everything we were, from a plaintiff standpoint, we were just putting facts out there and stuff that looked like, no way, this can't, but it was true. And I think the hardest part was sitting in court every day. I was there every day and listening to the fabrications and the lies from the defense. And there were so many times I just wanted to go, that's a lie. But I knew I'd get in trouble if I did that. So that was frustrating.
You got a huge punitive damages award. Probably, I think, maybe the largest one in California in these kind of cases. When the jury came back and said this, decided on this, what were your feelings about what they had decided? Vindication?
I was there. Eric was off-site right when the trial verdict came through, and I was there. And first of all, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that this happened. But so immediately after that, then came the corporation wanted to start
appealing.
And hey, we'll pay you this much if you take a lower amount. And for them, it was all about money. For us, it was all about what's the difference can we make? How can we make sure this gets out there? And with most appeals, there's a gag order with it. So I think several times we told Leslie, tell them to go pound salt.
Yeah, we're not going to do anything where we have to, where we couldn't do what we're doing today.
Well, you got to get that message out that these cases can be won, that operators like Dan Beatty still exist. He still exists and probably doing the same thing.
And I think the other thing is when a monetary award like that is given, I don't mean this to make us sound like we're these great and wonderful people, but we took a significant amount of it and gave it to an organization that's really doing advocacy for elders, because that was our initial intent. It was really to make a difference and some kind of a watchdog agency or even an advocacy agency for these elders who continue to go through this.
Yeah. Any parting words to Dan?
Well, it's a name that's certainly burned into my memory. I'm a big believer in capitalism, and so but not at the cost of human lives or human suffering.
This case changed your life, didn't it? You are now a registered nurse, aren't you?
Yes.
And the reason you became that is probably one of the reasons, this case, but also to help other people, right? Well, my condolences to both of you. And one last question. What do you think about the job Leslie did for you?
Oh, she's phenomenal. And just let me, when we were like, where do we go? Who can help? My wife worked in a healthcare organization, and she went to their general counsel and said, here's the scenario with my mother-in-law, my husband's mother. Who do you recommend? And they said, well, we're not big fans of her, but if this was my mother, because she has sat across the table from us, but we would get this lady named Leslie Clement. And, and she had won awards against these attorneys, and they're saying, yeah, she's incredible. And she's not only been our attorney, she's become our friend. And we value her relationship highly.
Thank you for coming here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You hear a lot in the news, like your cases, right? People falling, breaking their neck, dying, horrible things. Most people believe that a nursing home is going to take care of your aging parent, but that's not the case. is it?
No, what we've seen over the last 25 years is a pattern in practice of admitting residents who the facility does not have the staff to take care of.
The reason they don't have the staff is they don't want to spend the money.
Absolutely. It is a scheme.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. Because I read that, like Brookdale brings in $4.6 billion a year. They cover, handle 1,100 units.
They have hundreds of buildings across the country. Brookdale is the largest long-term care provider in the United States.
Have you ever looked at their balance sheet? I'm sure you have.
Oh, yes. It's
Well,
a
you
publicly
see-
traded company.
Yeah, well, you see the gross profit, you see the expense for labor. I'm thinking it cannot be a great percentage of the net income coming in, right?
Correct.
So it wouldn't hurt them to spend a few extra bucks here and there to get the kind of care, to avoid the kind of lawsuits that they end up paying them out, right?
Absolutely. The money's there. The money gets siphoned off to sometimes multiple shell corporations, all owned by the same people. And they like to do that because they like to make the individual facility look like it's bankrupt.
I need to bring this up. What you're saying seems crooked, seems immoral, it seems illegal, and a naive person might think, well, where are the regulatory agencies? What are they doing? We'd like to bring up the fact that regulatory agencies are politicized, meaning that sometimes there are statutes on the books, sometimes there's rules they have to follow, but there's no budget that is provided to these regulatory agencies. So A, they can't hire staff to investigate things, and B, where's this money coming from? Well, indirectly it's coming from the nursing homes. It's coming from the lobbyists, right, to the politicians who basically destroy an agency, a consumer protection agency, for example, that might help prevent some of these horrible events that happen, these incidents that happen. For all those who are watching this show right now, and you're thinking about putting your mother, your father, somebody that's near and dear to you into a nursing home, what do you have to say to them? Where should they check? What should they do?
Well, they should go to the facility unannounced. They should walk through the halls and see if employees even look them in the eye, or are they turning away. They should get down on their knees next to a resident who is in a wheelchair. Use your senses. How do they smell? How do they look?
How are they going to allow you to do this?
There's nobody around.
You can do your own inspection and nobody's going to stop you.
I tell my clients that before you do the tour with a marketing person, go in the building on a weekend, on a holiday, at night. There is no staff in there at night. I mean, really. And your point about the politicizing these agencies, in 1998, I was part of a investigation by the General Accounting Office and hearings, Senate hearing, that doctor, nurse, and a health facility evaluating nurse, which is an investigative nurse for the state of California, came out and testified about what was going on. And that health facility evaluator nurse from California testified that it's dirty at the top. I write citations, and my boss says, you can't issue that citation against that facility.
Really?
Absolutely.
This is a governmental agency, correct?
Absolutely. It's a Department of Public Health in California, which oversees both nursing homes and hospitals.
Okay, so let's say the worst happens. You suspect that your mother, your father, somebody in a nursing home that's related to you has been abused. Okay, what should you do immediately? Now, a lot of people might think, call the police. Are the police going to respond?
Well, in my experience, the police and sheriff's department, yes, they'll respond, but there's really no investigation done. The residents may have dementia or they've died as a result of the abuse or neglect, so they can't ask them. They can't speak for themselves. They have no voice. So and the DA's office isn't going to spend the time or money to do this. And that's been the case in Sacramento for the entire time I've been working on these cases, and it's true in other states.
Why aren't they?
Well, because they're challenging cases to prove. As I said, the victim usually has died or they have dementia. And the state doesn't issue citations, really, unless they are physically in the building and see something happen. A resident, a patient, a family member, an employee comes forward and says what happened, and the state feels, okay, we've got enough evidence here. But my experience, the Department of Social Services, which oversees assisted living, the Department of Public Health, which oversees hospitals and nursing homes, their quality of investigation has gone down so much. I mean, they just don't have enough investigators to go out in the field. I mean, for example, the Department of Social Services, one investigator may have 70 buildings that they have to go see annually and whenever there's a complaint. And that's just not one town. That's a whole region. It's physically impossible. Can't be done.
Because you are in a practice area that not too many lawyers take these cases, how do you examine, evaluate the cases that come to you? Because personally, if I was in one of these victims' shoes, I'd be calling you. But then a lot of people are calling you. So how do you determine? These are long cases, right? They take years. They cost lots of money. How do you evaluate the cases you take?
Well, we have a very detailed process. One person on our team is completely devoted to getting information from the family, obtaining photographs, diaries, journals, anything the family has, creating a history with the family of what happened. Then we are in the process of gathering all the records, and that's part of Monica's job. Fighting with the facility to obtain records, hospital records, nursing home records, and they're always incomplete. And then we send those records to a geriatric physician expert, and he tells us, is there a case here? What's the medical reasons why our client ended up dead?
So you do a lot of work before you even decide whether you're going to take the case or not.
Absolutely. We may spend up to a year developing the case before we ever file a complaint. But we do spend a lot of money evaluating each case before we take it. And the reason is, my first case was Grandma Dorothy. And I saw how devastating it was for my family to not only know what happened to Dorothy, but then to go through a trial, to have their depositions taken. And I vowed I would never take a case, I would never put a family through this unless I was very confident that we would win.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being on the show. Keep doing what you're doing. The world needs you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.